Well, tēnā koutou katoa, kia ora, everyone. The story is not about me, it's about this guy in the painting that we'll find out a little bit more about as we go. Before I start, though, I'd like to acknowledge the Ian Willison Foundation, which was able to send me to both Canberra, to the archive, and across to London to the British Library. And in addition to the acknowledgement, I like to make a disclaimer. I'm not talking about the Australian Chelsea Book Club or any of the number of Chelseas that are around the world. It seems to be a popular name. So let's get going and see if we can advance this slide, which at the moment, we'll try that one. Okay, so here we have a chap called Harold Munro. He was an English expat living in Florence, wanting to reform English poetry, English literature, and ranting about the state of those Victorians and those Edwardians from afar. He was told by some of his mentors, if you really want to make a difference, come back to England. And he did. Now, he came back in 1910, along with my character of the day, Arundel del Rey, who himself was born in Florence of Italian and Irish parentage. He grew up in that gorgeous city of Renaissance immersion in arts, literature, in culture. And at age 18, he met Harold Munro, who snapped him up, took him to London, and they ended up having an amazing time where not only was our friend Arundel del Rey running around in aristocratic circles, in art circles, but between the two of them, they ended up in this place, for those who know London, 93 Chancery Lane. So Harold Munro on the left, Arundel del Rey over there, fourth from the left, looking very dapper, high forehead and angular Roman nose. So they front up in 1912, 93 Chancery Lane, which was the headquarters for the Poetry Review that Harold Munro took over to reform poetry in England. And it was where they were headhunted by Rupert Brooke, the poet, and ended up producing multiple volumes of a famous series called Georgian Poetry. And in fact, Munro coined that term. Arundel del Rey was assistant editor, and he was writing voluminously. He was not quite a hack writer. He was a bit more elegant than that, but he certainly had to write to keep himself going. Not only did they start the Poetry Review, but they started the Poetry Bookshop. And that was a scene where you had people like Ezra Pound, Robert Bridges, W.B. Yeats, Vernon Lee, H.G. Wells, Rupert Brooke, coming to schmooze, buy books, sell their own books, and engage in poetry readings. There's great stories, for example, of these young guns who all went to visit Catherine Mansfield. And according to Vincent O'Sullivan, my source of intelligence, because we will find out how their paths crossed later, Catherine Mansfield was lounging on a sofa like a tigress, and all these young adulating males were around her, pretty much not knowing what to say and how to interact with her. Now, Del Rey moved out of Munro's orbit because he wanted to continue his education, went to London and then Balliol College in Oxford. There he was not only a student, but he ended up being the Taylorian lecturer in Italian and a mover and shaker when it came to the arts circle. He helped establish the Arts Club, the Operatic Society, the Dramatic Society. And as you can see from this particular advert in the Oxford Chronicle, as he was trying to get interest in the Oxford Arts Club, he was hanging out at 49 Broad Street, which for anybody who knows Oxford should read immediately Basil Blackwell and Blackwell's Shop. Arundel del Rey was one of his new young bibliophiles. At the same time, he continued his occupation as journalist. He was very interested in Italy's position in the war. He was a spokesperson and Italian delegate at the League of Nations meetings at Oxford, and wrote profusely not only why Italy went to war, but the whole Austrian Italy-Dalmatian situation. He continued to write academic literature, and one of the works that he produced is this one. This is the Golden Cockerel Press edition of Troilus and Cressade. He was editor of the collection of this particular work, as well as the person who oversaw its production, along with the printers and the binders, and Eric Gill, who pops up again in this story. Del Rey also wrote the introduction to the history of Pompey the Little for the Golden Cockerel Press, and was really not only a bibliophile in making, but a passionate book collector. And as we can see, cross paths with Virginia Woolf, which in her accustomed sardonic manner said he proposes to start a shop in Chelsea for the promotion of good books, and intends not only selling on a select principle, but binding, printing, providing a room where book lovers can love books. And her final remark, his weakness and paleness did not impress us, but then perhaps weakness and paleness are the necessary qualities. Perhaps her response was to the fact that Arundel Ray had offered to take over the management of Hogarth Press, and she might have read that as an allusion to the fact that their financial acumen wasn't completely great. But he did open this bookshop in Chelsea at 65 Chain Walk. Chain Walk being the home of many notables, and even today is peppered with blue plaques. You have Hilaire Belloc, D.G. Rossetti, Sylvia Pankhurst, Swinburne, Turner, George Eliot, Whistler, Walter Sickert, Leigh Hunt, and I could go on and on. But as you can see from the Daily Herald note below, there were three pillars upon which Del Rey decided to establish his not book shop, but book club. He wanted to sell good English works. He wanted to be the purveyor of foreign works, and he wanted to stage exhibitions. This international focus is really important because he thought internationalism was, and cultural internationalism was the way that could bring nations together. And having gone through the war experience, he spoke with some authority on that matter. Here's Chelsea Old Church on the embankment that still stands today, despite being bombed significantly during the Blitz. And the shop, the Chelsea Book Club shop, was next door in this beautiful building with the swan on the corner. And you can see the titling there, the bookshop windows purveying some wonderful looking and very enticing titles, with a toy shop on one side and an antiques dealer on the other side. Sadly, this work was bombed during the war and does not remain. His friendship, though, with, if you want to call it that, with Virginia Woolf led to him stalking many Hogarth Press titles. Here's an example from the Modernist Archives publishing project out of the University of Reading. These are the order books from the Hogarth Press, and peppered throughout them are references to the Chelsea Book Club. And interestingly enough, on this spread, for Hope Merrill's Paris, a poem dating 1920, you can see on the left-hand side, the Poetry Bookshop with Harold Monroe is ordering the same titles as the Chelsea Book Club on the right-hand side. And they dipped in and out over time, but one of the key differences between the two shops was the whole domain of art, which we'll get to in a minute. Here's one of the bookseller's ticket, rather in sorry state, but one of the few pieces of evidence that I found on a real live book, and then a book bill of sale from the Chelsea Books Club's second location. But that's a story for another day. Del Rey was really interested in producing works himself under the Chelsea Book Club label, so equally interested in translation. He commissioned this 9 songs from the 12th century French, and commissioned not only the translator, but the artist, both of whom he knew rather well. He also put together this keepsake for 1921, which you can see from the ad on the left-hand side: poems, stories, essays, original woodcuts, etchings, and it's a roll call of some rather important people from the 1920s. The shop itself was opened in 1919, which, for those of you who know another rather famous bookshop on the other side of the channel, Shakespeare & Co. in Paris, opened on the left bank, Rue de l'Odéon, in 1919 as well. And both Sylvia Beach and Arundel Ray were friends and shared quite a bit of insider knowledge in the book trade. The other thing that arose out of the friendship with Virginia Woolf was an opportunity for the Chelsea Book Club to commission broadsheets, or broadsides, if we want to be more bibliographically specific. This was following in a tradition that Harold Monroe had started, but this is the one and only instance of a broadside that Del Rey ended up producing under the imprint. This only sells for a cool £10,000. If you've got any up your sleeve, I'm dying to get one. One of the points of difference between the Poetry Bookshop and the Chelsea Book Club was its insistence on art shows, notably shows that featured local and international artists brought together in context. So this, in the media of the time, there's been nothing of its kind before, where you can purchase books, you can find all the modern French and foreign as well as English books, and you can go and visit exhibitions. The exhibitions were drawings and prints, the exhibitions were paintings, the exhibitions really brought in some of the key players of the modernist movement, not only literary modernism, but visual modernism. And the quite old world air with quaint old-fashioned lattice windows and quiet little rooms, enlivened with yellow walls and vivid green curtains and cushion covers. You can imagine you being there, 1920, in that little shop of delights. People going through and hearing about it, like Wallace Stevens, thinking, Augustus John etchings, I've got to go there. It was the place to be seen. It was the place to go. It appeared also in the gossip pages, the women's pages, and a number of local rags. And all the time, they're listing who went, who was being exhibited, and trying to drum up enough business. Arundel Del Rey was very clever. He advertised in all the major art connoisseur magazines. He ensured that people knew that Cézanne had images that he was able to borrow from friends around the world were going to be in his shop. And he ensured that people knew about the whole world of books, wood engravings, and continued his friendship with Eric Gill. So quite an amazing guy, quite an amazing shop. Its most famous example, and if anybody knows about the Chelsea Book Club and even has heard the name Arundel Del Rey, it was because of this exhibition, African Art from the Congo. Roger Fry, the great art critic and reviewer, went with Virginia Woolf. And although today it's a bit off color in the way in which he describes those sculptures, the way he assumes primitivism is a thing to be empathized with. It was a massively important exhibition and influenced many artists. But that's pretty much all that you would find today in the literature. It's taken a lot of archaeology to put this story together. But the second thing that you may know about the Chelsea Book Club, if you know anything, centers around this story. It's the story of Ulysses. So there's Sylvia Beach in her shop with James Joyce, Jim, the author, who walked in one day despairing that his unusual novel, shall we say, would never been published. It had just been banned in the US in its serialized edition. It hadn't been finished. And Sylvia Beach, who herself, an American emigre, who didn't know anything about bookselling but sets up a shop, doesn't know anything about publishing, but says to James Joyce, would you like me to take on this publication? Of course, he says yes. It is launched on Joyce's birthday, the 2nd of February, 1922. And the Chelsea Book Club is the first English book club to import copies. It imports 18 copies. And Sales of the book itself, according to Beach's ledgers, were anywhere from Buenos Aires, Egypt, Japan, Pakistan, Russia, through to the Australian Book Company, Gordon and Gotch, F.W. Preece and Son. The list goes on and on. And you can track that through these amazing ledgers that are sitting in the Harry Ransom Library at the University of Austin in Texas. But the questions always become, how did these works come to London? And there's a great story that is told by one of the later managers of the shop who said, Ulysses, we're the only people in England to have it in the Chelsea Book Club. For I was in Sylvia Beach's little shop in the Rue de l'Odéon today and took a packing case of copies from her. She explained it had been returned from some other London bookshop, badly damaged, apparently by a pick wielded by the customs. I would have to take the risk of any spoiled copies. In fact, I'd known about Ulysses ever since Oliver Gogarty, the Buck Milligan in the story, lent me advance extracts printed in America. And had been published in the Little Review, which had been banned by federal authority from the US mails. The only problem now was to get the case safely to Chelsea. A kind friend sent them by the diplomatic bag, or as it is called, the valise. At that time, all sorts of things were sent by the valise, even a Pleyel piano belonging, so the rumor ran, to a musical counselor at the French embassy. We opened the case fearfully after the bookshop had been closed for the day. The police might call. We distributed the copies by hand next day. Not one remained on the premises. Now, this might sound like bibliographic skullduggery, but Arundel Del Rey himself was an interesting character because he had this sidebar life as an intelligence officer, as a cultural attaché for the Italian embassy, and during the war as a translator and intelligence runner for the Italian military based in London. He continued that dual career when, in 1927, not quite out of the blue, he transforms himself from being Taylorian lecturer in Italian to professor of English literature at Tokyo Imperial University. There, he continued his interactions with the arts. He mounted exhibitions. He sent a collection of Japanese ceramics to Rome. He was a very well-respected scholar, translator, moved around from Tokyo then to Formosa, as it was then, or Taiwan. And sadly was interned during the Second World War because he sympathized with the Italian king and not Mussolini, who for the Japanese was close to God. So that the photo on the right is the photo of him as he comes out of being interned, 1944 to 45. And while I would have thought that given Ulysses was such an important title and such an important part of Arundel Del Rey's life, that certainly he would have taken a copy with him. But we'll never know because all of his correspondence and books were confiscated when he was interned. But that didn't stop this man from reinventing himself. So he travels to New Zealand, where, as you can see here, he becomes part of the foundation staff of the English Language Institute. There he is in wonderful profile on the left. He was appointed as a lecturer because at this point he was retired and there was no place to put a professor in the Victoria University of Wellington system. But you can see he's committed to teaching English as a second language, committed to continuing his career as a literary scholar of both Italian and English literature and the arts, and loved to dance. This wonderful, charming, pixie-ish picture of him at one of the Colombo students' graduation balls. So this is, if you're writing a standard biography of the man, this is what you would enumerate. You would talk about his life, his times, his contributions, and in this case, it's when he's leaving New Zealand to go to Australia to live out his life. But I've been thinking about how do you really tell different kinds of stories? How do you talk about biography at all? And Jean-Paul Sartre said, is biography even possible in the 21st century, let alone the 20th century? So Elizabeth Podnick said, are the two greatest challenges notable in biography arise from both the technologies that allow for radical new ways of producing, disseminating, and theorizing the genre, and from expansion of the definition of what constitutes biographical expression. So for me, this Cubist painting of Arundel del Rey, done in 1961 by the New Zealand artist Melvin Day, otherwise known as Pat Day, exemplifies the multifaceted nature of the character that I'm looking at. His hands eloquent and were, Day was a student of his. He was mesmerized by Del Rey's hands. The ways in which the picture plane is broken up, the ways in which he's wearing both the traditional Western scholarly robes as well as traditional Japanese bit of attire. So how do you bring these all together? So over my relatively short career in this space, I've thought about Robert Kuplan Harding and making social graphs. I've thought about bringing together different assets related to William Colenso to create a generative artwork called Unexpected Connections. But I think for this particular man, the best way I can honor him is to have a conversation with history. How can he tell his story? How can we use all of the source material, his correspondence, his voice recordings, his journalism, his academic writing? How can we put it through something like ChatGPT, generative pre-trained transformers? That's where my conference theme comes in, transformation. How can we talk to him and how can we talk back? So that's a work in progress at the moment. I'm inspired so to do, a man of many facets, a man whose story deserves to be told, a man whose story has never been told. But if we want to have, in the final wrap-up, as you usually do when you find out what's happened to the characters, the Chelsea Book Club as a character eventually folds, but we're still left with the gentleman who referred to himself as self, S-E-L-F. Kia ora tatou, thank you.